Greetings, my wonderful pawns and meeples. Welcome back. It's hump day, and we're over the hump of the bracket. We're here in the back half of the showdown. Oh boy, the hits keep coming. I'm Rob Huber, here with...
Brendan, the Professor Riley.
Hey, Brendan. Ooh, it's been a tough showdown so far. I don't feel like I can do this one just me and you. I think we need to call in some reinforcements to bring us over the crest of the hill of the Game Fight Show tournament. Who can we rely on?
Well, Rob, I gotta say, I've been calling myself Brendan the Professor Riley this whole time, and it feels like the thinking for this matchup is so strong. We need to double the level of Professor on this episode. So I say we bring in our friend Paul Booth. Paul, you there?
I'm here. It's Paul over the hump Booth.
All right. Oh, boy. I really appreciate that both of you are wearing your full regalia. Here, let me just put this on my dunce cap. Now we have our roles all lined up.
Well, like
Paul,
I just woke up like this, Rob.
That's right. These are my pajama regalia.
Yeah. I didn't get dressed up for this.
I think you could market those. Paul, thank you so much for joining us again. We really loved your feedback, your participation in last year's bracket.
Yeah, you liked my participation. My feedback you hated.
Yep, well, we're giving you a second try, but don't blow it. Oh boy, we have brought you back on, I think, what you could argue. This could be the hottest day of the whole tournament. The games that we have coming up against each other, the designers, the publishers, the artists, the games, everything. This is just, everything's coming together to bring us excitement, challenge.
It's too much, Rob. This is an
Brendan.
incredible set of matchups, and I can't wait to hear how Paul breaks them down. Let's just jump right into the first one.
Let's do it.
Sure, that first showdown, it's Wingspan versus Just One.
Oh, this is an incredible matchup, and I think that the voters are going to be hard-pressed to decide. Both of these games coming out of matchups that were equally difficult, and now we have Wingspan and Just One facing off against one another. It really feels like this is the Titanic matchup, maybe to end all matchups.
You know what? It just feels like this is unfair because they're so completely different. How do you compare? It's not even comparing apples and oranges because those are two pieces of fruit. This is like comparing shoes and spit.
Well, you put a little spit on those shoes, you rub them up, and you get something beautiful. And I think that's what you've got with both of these games. Wonderful to look at, smooth to play. And I think that's maybe where we're going to go if we want to start talking about how you judge between these games. Wingspan looks kind of deceived because it's so pretty. It's just beautiful game to look at. But once you start playing it, there's a lot of game there. Highly replayable. Would you guys agree that there's, if not a little take that to it, there's certainly hate drafting?
Oh, certainly hate drafting.
The hate drafting you were talking about? Trademark.
That's right.
Trademark,
I made
trademark.
up that mechanism. I mean, Wingspan is generally designed to be a game where you aren't doing too much eye poking. In other words, gouging out people's eyes. But as you get to play more, you start to recognize which cards work with which other cards. And so there definitely are times where I have an engine coming up where I'm going to need to discard a couple. So maybe on my previous turn, I'll grab those cards that you really needed and then just chuck them in the discard pile and watch you whine.
I feel like it's a game that rewards extra plays. Going up against someone who's played a lot, you struggle. Whereas the new person playing Wingspan, the chick, if you will, has not developed the wings to fly in that game.
Yes, the fledglings have a little more trouble with this game. And, that's certainly something that can be said of many of the games on the bracket. Do you want me to name one game that you can't say that of? Just one game you can't
which game
say
are you
that
talking
of?
about, Rob?
Well, that's Just One, which is what Wingspan is, of course, up against. Just One. It's also a lovely game to look at. Certainly, it doesn't have many art assets, but I find the cover art to be very pleasing. Mm-hmm. But that game, basically, what do you think? 4 or 5 minutes before you fully get the game. You're playing at expert level as far as this game's demands, which admittedly they're limited, but the fun isn't. The fun isn't limited. What do you think? That's an interesting dichotomy between these two games. One of them does have a bit of a barrier to entry and rewards the frequent player. The other one just invites you right in. Everyone gets a comfy chair. You all sit down and we're going to feel about as smart as each other because we're all working together to win.
You know, there's something to be said for a game that a 10-year-old can play with a 30-year-old, with a 50-year-old, with a 90-year-old. I can't see that happening with Wingspan. That's just one. But on the same token, I don't think you can go very in depth. It's a very surface level game. It's fun, but the fun only lasts so long.
True. Now, I think these are both games that have probably brought some people into the hobby. I think if Wingspan brings you into the hobby, you're going to be further in, so to speak, than if Just One does. But, you know, from Just One, maybe you go over to the Chameleon. Then from the Chameleon, maybe you go over to the Resistance. And then there, you're going over to Shadows over Camelot. And then you're Dead of Winter. And then you're playing Game of Thrones, 2nd edition. And then you're playing Twilight Imperium 4, just boom, boom, boom.
And that's usually a good weekend. I think there's something to be said for the light, breezy engagement that you can get with Just One. I think there's also something to be said for player count. You know, Wingspan, on the box it says plays 5. I'm sorry, you'd have to peck my eyes out to get me to play that game at 5. Unless all the players are extremely committed to playing fast, because as much as I like Wingspan, it slows down at the higher player counts. By contrast, Just One, you know, it really gets going at 6, 7, 8 people. That's that might even be its sweet spot. So when we think about the people coming to vote, Wingspan has sold an ungodly number of copies. In fact, the other day, Elizabeth Hargrave tweeted that it had sold 750,000 copies in the 2 years since it's been out. I bet Just One has more. Well, I guess they both won the spiel. It plays 6, 7, 8 people at a time. If all those people come and vote, you got numbers on Wingspan in terms of the numbers of people coming out to vote.
No question. You know, these are both highly rated games. Wingspan gets an 8.1. Just One gets a 7.6. There's a little daylight between those, but it's pretty tight. Here's something I want to talk about. And this is an aspect of all of today's competitors, which are going to include in our next bout, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Scythe versus Spirit Island, which, oh my gosh, talk about some heavy hitters today. Ooh.
Yeah, we're going to fight about that one.
But here's what we have. We have co-op versus in both of these bouts, and we also have Stonemeyer versus another publisher here. And I'm really interested to see how the voting public respond to this.
Can I point out two things? One,
you can point out, yes, two things.
two things.
I did the math.
You know, Wingspan, I think we need to mention, because Brendan did talk about Elizabeth Hargrave there is something to be said for a game that has an all-female creative team behind it, especially given the lack of representation in the board game arena. And second, Wingspan, it appears more edible than Just One. And the little eggs, if they are not candies, damn well should be.
So you're talking about the Jordan Almond factor here.
I am talking about the Jordan Almond factor.
Something we basically cover in every episode of Game Fight Show, as the frequent listener will know. Yes, Wingspan is actually, I'm going to check the charts. 1 second. Yeah, they're still right there, number one on the Jordan Almond factor chart. JAFC.
I think the closest you're going to get with Just One is with the careful arrangement of those whiteboard things. You could use it as a taco holder, but you'd have to supply your own tacos. I mean, there's nothing in the game that looks edible there.
Maybe they could do an expansion of Just One Taco.
Yeah, I mean, the markers are colorful, but they don't look particularly edible. Whereas, I know plenty of people who just gobble up Scythe.
Nice transition there, Rob.
Thank you. I try. They can't get enough of that game. So if I were Spirit Island, I would be worried when I saw that I was coming up against Scythe in my second round bout. But I wouldn't be terrified. And if I were Scythe, I wouldn't be sleeping too easy here, because Spirit Island is just such a great game. It's we've had so many co-ops make it through to the second round this year, and this is the heaviest one of them. Actually, I'm looking at the charts, and as things stand, halfway through the second round, if you're just looking at the games that are still in the bracket, Spirit Island is the heaviest weighted game with a 4.01. So it's going to be interesting. 3.41 for Scythe. Here's the thing I want to say. I think these games scratch about the same itch. The big difference for me, is whether you want to play a co-op or a versus. And now I know that Scythe is it's sort of the epitome of the versus game. But I'm just saying that these are meaty, decision-driven games. I think that there's a very significant amount of overlap in the fan base for these two games. What do you guys think?
I agree with you. I wouldn't have said that they scratched the same itch, but in thinking about it, I think you're right in that the decision-making and the decision tree that you have to go through with both games is similar. I will say one of the big differences for me in both games is the relative openness of Spirit Island in terms of my choices. In Scythe, you were kind of limited by a certain number of choices, which is the strength, I think. Whereas in Spirit Island, because of the kind of constant refresh of those cards, you get certain abilities that you can change and adjust as you go, which makes the game a little bit more unpredictable.
Sure. Astute. Well said. Hey, Brendan, we're going to go ahead. We're going to keep Paul for the whole episode.
Oh, no.
Cut his check. He gets to stay.
I've been demoted. Oh, okay. I thought you were kicking me off the show.
No, just the episode.
Okay.
No,
okay.
I'm not.
Now that I have the major word here, Brendan, you're off the show.
No. No.
Brendan, I am sorry. You do not have tenure yet.
Boo. we just have to do 6 more of these tournaments and then 10 years locked in.
We'll send you before the committee.
I think, Rob, you've raised a really interesting point in the terms of the levels of similarity that the voters are going to have to decide between. Another place where both of these games really shine is integrating the ideas being expressed in the gameplay choices, right? Both Scythe and Spirit Island have things you're doing that advance the story of your characters and your faction that happen in the gameplay rather than, say, by reading a booklet or something. And, I think just thinking back for one more moment on the previous bout, fans of theme, you get lots of window dressing with Wingspan, but, people who complain that Wingspan is sort of pasted on theme have a bit of a point. You aren't really doing anything bird-like. And
True.
The person that you're supposed to be in Wingspan is so nebulous, it's really hard to lock down. What are you supposed to be doing? You're building, I don't know. And just one, there's no theme at all, right? Whereas both Scythe and Spirit Island have a clear narrative hook for the player about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think, that's going to make a big challenge for people deciding, but maybe it comes down to, do you feel like being in a 1920s, or do you feel like being a creepy ghost fending off the colonizers?
I think you're probably not wrong that some of this is going to come down to theme for some of our voters who, by the way, you can set yourself apart from just a listener. Put yourself into that voter category by just going over to @GameFightShow
GameFightShow
on Twitter. And all you got to do, you've heard me say it before, and you know what? You're going to hear me say it again. It's my simple 3-part plan. You just vote, vote, vote!
Vote, vote, vote!
I'm sorry, is that www.twitter.com?
http://
I mentioned with Wingspan the advantage of the all-female creative team, which I do think is really important. I think with Spirit Island, the fact that it's taking that colonial theme that's so common in games and twisting it, I think is a really important thing to remember as well, especially given Scythe being a game of colonization in a certain way, colonizing a pseudo-Europe.
Speaking of Scythe and colonization, the astute listener will recall that Scythe is here because they beat Puerto Rico in their first round bout. And I think in many ways, Spirit Island is a anti-Puerto Rico, which we've talked about it before, and we won't go into it in any great detail right now, but Puerto Rico is a wonderful game, but it certainly doesn't examine the subject matter very deeply, especially some of the aspects that could be rather troubling.
For the way that Scythe approaches this question, I think some listeners or players may find some comfort in the idea of a game that makes the Imperial practices fictional. I know for myself that playing a game involving space imperialism feels less icky than playing a game involving 19th century real world imperialism, even though I recognize that both of them involve a problematic construct about how societies should govern themselves. But still, space lions conquering space turtles feels less bad to me than Europe conquering Asia or whatever. I don't know if Scythe's alternate reality steps it far enough away from the real situation of Europe after World War I to dodge some of these problematic constructs or not.
You know what? We're going to find out because people are going to vote. We're going to get an answer. It's just such an interesting group. Are we going to end up with a third round Stonemeyer v. Stonemeyer, Hargrave v. Stegmeyer bout? I'm going to have to buy a seatbelt for this recording throne
Rob,
in the studio.
I was wondering, do we need to go look at the bylaws of this tournament to make sure that Jamie Stegmeyer can't pull any shenanigans and withdraw Wingspan as the publisher? Does he have control over its entry in the bracket?
He knows. Once it's in the bracket,
All right.
It's in the bracket.
I do want to be clear.
He's probably written a blog about it.
Yes. I do want to be clear for all of our listeners. I don't read Jamie Stegmeyer as the kind of guy who would pull those shenanigans.
Having met the man, us both
Indeed.
having met the man.
I mean, he gave us
think
gold
we
for
know.
Pete's sakes.
He gave us gold. He is a good egg. See what I did there?
He didn't give us eggs, though, and
Stonemeyer.
I hold that against him.
Wingspan.
Yeah.
No, but you bought eggs from him.
I think one other thing to think about as we look at all 4 games in the brackets here, 3 of them have had ongoing support from the publishers in the form of expansions. Stonemeyer games, they definitely do have the expansion practice down solid. And, they've already released 2 expansions for Wingspan in 2 years, and they've promised another 4, I think. And Scythe, of course, has had a couple expansions plus the big legacy campaign. And Spirit Island I think they've done 3 now. So there's a lot of room for people to explore. And, they only have 24 hours with this recording to vote. So people are going to have to really get out there and play a lot of expansions to decide. Because I assume that's what our listeners are doing, is playing the games in depth before they vote.
Sure. Here's one, though. I'm going to ask. I guess I'll ask, but then I'll tell. I'm going to show and tell. These 4 games, wonderful games. Played them all. Which one have you played the most in the last calendar year, Brendan, out of these?
Well,
most games in
the last calendar year. It's
Yes.
gonna be a razor thin margin between Just One and Wingspan for me. Wingspan gets a lot of play at my house, but when we play Just One, we play 3-4 games of it, and that comes to the table regularly as well. Without looking at my stats app, I'm gonna guess it's Just One.
Paul, have you gotten any plays of these games in over the last calendar year?
If we're talking calendar year,
I always do.
it would be Spirit Island, hands down. I've played it in a group a couple of times, and I've soloed it a bunch, which I think we can also mention. Spirit Island has, of these 4, the best solo mode, I think.
The Just One solo mode's
garbage.
not
Just
good.
One
It's
solo
garbage.
mode really blows. Yeah.
I win
Well,
every
see,
time.
I maybe am playing it wrong because I can never get a clue. All of the clues that are given match, and I just don't have anything to guess with. It's brutal.
I never figure out what my word is because I can't look at the card. But if you're talking overall, it would undoubtedly be Scythe, which
Sure.
I've played probably 50 times.
Here's where I'm going. Hands down for me, over the last year, Just One is the game I've played the most out of these. Because 1 copy you can play with just a boatload of people over internet. This newfangled internet thing they're talking about. Just One is one of the darlings of Zoom gameplay in a way that Wingspan, Scythe, and Spirit Island, the idea of trying to remote play one of those with a physical copy makes me want to run screaming into the night.
And this year, I don't think we can ignore the pandemic in how it'll shape voters. Maybe people are going to come out and vote for just one because they're like, you know what? I got to play this with grandma and my 10-year-old Niffling.
Mm-hmm. And then if that statement's true, then Friday's bouts are going to be interesting because pandemic is coming up against Gloomhaven.
Ooh.
We say it a lot. It's never not true, but it's certainly not untrue to say that Wingspan versus Just One and Scythe versus Spirit Island is going to be one of the toughest pairs of bouts to decide. And it's one of the ones that I am the most excited to see how things come out. It's another one like, we were talking on Monday. Any one of these wins, and I'm not shocked and I'm not upset. If Just One beat Wingspan, maybe I'd raise an eyebrow, but I wouldn't need to seek the fainting couch and apply a cold compress at the shock.
You wouldn't need to, but you wouldn't mind it.
Well, I do it, but generally with a julep, mint or otherwise. Scythe versus Spirit Island. For me, this is another one where I'm happy to be not the person deciding these bouts because the pro-con list, the Venn diagrams, spreadsheets that are going to be involved in trying to decide which one of these two games is going to come out on top. I just don't know how to do it myself.
The best part about being one of the regular hosts is that we have a journalistic obligation not to make a call. However, we encourage our guests to do so. Paul, where do you come down on these two matchups? Who do you think is going to come out of the Twitter battle on top?
You only have to share if you want to.
I don't want to prejudice anything.
No.
I would be shocked if Wingspan does not come out ahead in the matchup between Wingspan and Just One. I think it's an honest-to-God toss-up with Scythe and Spirit Island, and I think it's going to come down to who votes. Are you going to have voters who prefer the smooth mechanics of Scythe or the spirited entanglements of Spirit Island? I think even looking at the stats, right, ranked very close together on Board Game Geek, weighted not too far away from each other. I feel like it's going to be a tough matchup. That one I can't say.
I think that, not only do I tend to see wisdom in what you're saying, but I think the betting markets tend to agree with your assessment there. But, there's only one way we're going to find out, and that's if you, the good listener, become the good voter by going to @GameFightShow on Twitter. You go there and you just vote. It's easy. You click, boom, Wingspan or Just One, and boom, you click Scythe or Spirit Island. You've done your good deed for the day. You've helped out one of your favorite games. And if one of these isn't one of your favorite games, then it's time to play one of these games because you're missing out, friend. And they are all great. And so are you, good listener. But you know what else is good?
Our guest, Paul.
Our guest, Paul, is good. And so is reading. Some people say it's fundamental. Paul, I think that it's safe to say that most of our listeners are board game enthusiasts.
I would find it hard to believe the opposite.
Well, there are some people who are just here for the betting action.
I bet you there are some people who are just here for the Brendan action.
Oh, yeah.
The Riley stands are out in force. It's true.
Do you know what he wears under the regalia?
We roomed together, so yeah.
So you happen to have written about the subject of board games in an academic book that you have published. Is this not true?
It is, in fact, true that has occurred.
Have you spoken to any of the designers of these games when you we were doing so?
I have spoken to the designers of many of these games. Elizabeth Hargrave and I have had a good conversation. And we've actually shared some information for the book that came out called Board Games as Media. I did a survey of board gamers and got some statistics on gender and race of about 1,000 board gamers who took the survey, which she asked for and used in a presentation, and then gave me the presentation. I got to use that in the book, so it was a very nice reciprocal arrangement.
I love that. Such serendipity. Let's hear it for the board gaming community. In general, what a supportive, creative, thoughtful group we tend to be. What is the name of your book? Let's be very clear. Paul Booth's book is called?
It's called Board Games as Media. It asks the question, what if we looked at board games the same way we look at film and television and books and podcasts, for the meanings they create, for the ideas they arouse, and for the arguments they are making.
So if I were someone who had, say, hundreds of board games that I had poured potentially thousands and thousands of hours into collecting, curating, playing, discussing, cataloging, inventorying, sharing, borrowing, trading, would reading this book help me to synthesize some of the ideas that I have around the hobby so that I can better share those thoughts with people who I speak with that are outside of the hobby?
Gosh, Rob, I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I think this book probably would help you think about and talk about the games that you love, and in doing so would probably make you sound like the smart, thoughtful, engaging person that you are.
That I want people to believe I am. But seriously, folks, this is a book that I happen to know Paul put huge amounts of effort and thought into. He spoke with at least dozens. More.
I spoke to about 100 designers and artists and creators.
You owe it to yourselves, is what I'm saying. Go seek this book out, buy a copy, and then this is vital. Read it.
Yeah, and then buy a second copy in case you want to read it again.
Yeah. Or give it as a gift. Because the truth is, board games do get so much less serious consideration for what is actually, monetarily speaking, a pretty big market. And as far as the amount of time that people spend on this, people spend, as we all know, huge amounts of time. This is something that not only deserves to be studied in sort of the hallowed halls of academia, or academia, macadamia.
That's the one.
Because we're all nuts.
But it's something that it's worth thinking about in your own life. This is something that you spend a lot of time thinking about it. Why not do some meta-analysis of your beloved hobby and have Paul Booth, the most genial of fellows, guide you along the way?
It would be my absolute pleasure.
Where is the best place for people who are seeking out your book to do so?
Amazon is probably, at this point in time, given the pandemic, the best place to go and find it. It's there. It's available. Board Games as Media is the title. I'm always happy to talk with folks. So if any of your kind listeners want to get in touch over Twitter, I'd be happy to chat or talk board games and have spirited discussions about areas we agree and areas we disagree.
Excellent. What is your Twitter handle then?
At pbooth81.
Brendan, we got a heck of a couple of matchups. And, Paul, thank you for being a heck of a guest expert commentator joining us today.
It's been my heck of a pleasure, Rob.
Nice.
I think, why don't we cool our heels for a second, maybe have a sip of tea to refresh our voices.
I'm having a julep.
I will meet you on the chaise, and we'll have Eleanor give us the results from yesterday's very big bouts. Eleanor?
All right, everybody, here's Eleanor with your results. We knew that these were two exciting bouts, and well, wouldn't you know it, they have produced some exciting results. Eleanor Moon got his ticket to ride punched as Race to the Galaxy beat his much-loved game. Meanwhile, I'll bet you didn't expect the castles of Burgundy to fall to as humble a siege engine as a box full of tiles. But fall they did, as Azul secured its position in round 3. Back to you all.
Well, I said I wouldn't be surprised, and I guess I'm not, but I'm sad to see those games go.
Don't let the caboose hit you on the way out.
Tom Lehman continues on his race for the top.
But we have Azul versus Race for the Galaxy to talk about in a little bit, and that is going to be fun. It's always fun to hang out. Thanks again, Paul, for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
The pleasure is ours. Thanks, Eleanor. Thank you, listeners, for joining us, and we'll see you Friday when, it's the end of the second round. We're going to be talking about the final 2 matchups in the second round. That's going to be Camel Cup versus Lords of Waterdeep, and as we mentioned earlier, Pandemic versus Gloomhaven.
Oh.
You know?
That's a punch in the
They're
gut.
all big. I don't want to get into commentary now, except when I comment to say, thank you all, take care of yourselves, and I'm going to see you back here Friday.
Keep it Joe.
Goodbye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.